Welcome to Sitecore Standard Value. My name is Sultan and Rick. I'm joined today with my friend Rick, who flew over from the US.
I did.
To meet Jo Tyrer, President of Composable Solutions here at Sitecore. Hi, Jo.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. This is my first podcast.
Great.
This is my first time in the London office, so a day full of firsts.
Same here. So, Jo, tell us more about you. Who are you?
I am responsible for the go-to-market for the Composable Solutions, and that is all the acquisitions that we made in 2021. And I am responsible for driving the value out of obviously those acquisitions that we've made for the business, but also delivering that innovation into both our customer base and capturing new market opportunities.
Fantastic.
It's possibly the best job in the company.
I think it is. After hours, I think.
Yeah, second best.
Second best. So you are really at the forefront of a big transformation that we are all going through, and I think the entire market towards composable. So which trends are you seeing, and what is your vision across, let's say, over the next 18 months?
You know, it's a very interesting time for the MarTech space as a whole. And you know, in my career in technology, I think I could only possibly point to one other example of a macro trend that ended in an entire industry having to innovate, and that was the GFC. And fintech became a thing after the GFC. And it was driven by a macro trend of essentially needing to be more agile to respond and never have to face that sort of macro external event again. And we're seeing the same thing now affecting our customers in relation to their need to be more agile and respond quickly, because the pandemic's completely changed the way that their customers are wanting to engage with them. And it's challenging everything around the marketing function within an organization, but also marketing's role as the voice of the customer inside an organization. So they are now able to, probably unparalleled as a function, to be able to understand the customer better than anybody else. Possibly finance might be the other function, but marketing is now key inside a corporation to really understand the impact and how to respond and be agile. And one of the things we've seen as a growing trend as a result of the last 2 years is that challenge to that capability is there. There's obviously now we're experiencing inflation, debt, massive impacts on how spend is made inside a company. And so marketing organizations are having to balance that need to be able to respond, but not huge budgets to do that. And of course, now the space we're in with cloud and enabling technologies like that, the composable stack is particularly relevant. And Sitecore's got a fantastic legacy with our prime product of XP, which has served us very, very well for a very, very long period of time. But obviously we need to address the need to be more agile and offer a much more, like I say, creative. The word compose is create. So a more creative response to that need to be agile in the market.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's, I think about how much I've seen the budget move from IT over to marketing. And one of the things I was pondering lately is, with marketers, the challenge that they're facing with all the channels that are out there and what they're trying to deal with, and the never-ending forest of logos. I'm sure you've seen all the possible solutions. If there were, if somebody's starting out kind of greenfield and they had the luxury, I mean, obviously that's a nice place to be. Is there any, path that you would set somebody down if they're looking at greenfield? I mean, doesn't have to be a specific platform, but just kind of, that your thoughts around setting somebody up for long-term success if they're able to have that luxury of starting from that greenfield space.
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot in my team is how do you get going? I mean, we obviously have two different motions in my team. One is taking our install base, our existing list of customers, and showing them a way forward and how to modernize and deliver value out of, potentially a move away from monolithic stack, whether that's us or somebody else. and show where they can get some wins on composable, and that's driven by there's something that the monolith isn't doing for them that they need to then address, and there's a business case behind it. And to your question on net new, there are not many companies who haven't already got some sort of plan in place, but really it start with an outside in view of your company. What's the business issue you're trying to solve, and then go from there. And I think if you experience your company from a brand perspective by actually acting like a consumer, you can then diagnose where the gaps are in that customer journey, and so therefore identify what your company's limitations are, and then you probably have a better idea of where to start. We have very in the composable solution area, it's very much a typical SaaS model, which is land, adopt, expand, renew. So start with something that's a point solution that's going to get you value and drive a very quick time to value, and we have a very strong message around that with the composable solutions, and then we're talking weeks of time to value projects, not months, right? These are very fast turnarounds. Land with something. Start with that, then look to where you can grow from there. Don't try and just create the monolith in the cloud again. That's crazy. But do look at it from a what problem are you trying to solve perspective. So it's a difficult question to answer because there isn't a one single journey, and it might depend on what you're facing. If you're in one particular vertical, you might be experiencing disruption from an external player coming into your space, and you need to therefore be starting to address how quickly you provision content, for example, or alternatively you might decide marketing campaigns is your problem. I mean, it's a very, very big answer to do, unless you actually. I think the key is look at your organisation from an external lens, and then you probably have an idea of what problem you to start with.
Yeah, fully agree. And the monolithic piece you touched on, it's where Sitecore came from, and I remember many, I kind of came from the partner space, how many times there were bits in that monolithic tool that were never used. And so I think Composable helps solve for that. You're not wasting what you purchased. You may have some pieces that you're not using. And let me just kind of one follow on that. So we touched on the unicorn of starting from greenfield, right? I know that's, how about all the folks, because I know this is a huge question. I've seen this out on the sim tour, and I'm sure we're going to hear this a lot at Symposium this year. I have XP. I've been an XP customer for years. How do I move forward into a composable space? How do I stay modern and current with the next version of what we're doing?
Yeah, and that is an answer that we are very comfortable answering, right? Which is we recognise that XP's been successful, in the sense that there was not the same adoption of cloud when a lot of these companies were buying XP. There wasn't. It wasn't this. It was a different world we were in. And there will be, and we have to be grown up and adult enough to recognise that there will be situations where the customer isn't getting the value from the investment they've made, and we have to be comfortable with that. And again, it goes back to, well, what is it that the product isn't doing, right? What is it? Where are the gaps? Where are the areas that you thought you were buying something but it hasn't delivered or it hasn't been deployed, whatever it? And can we do it better and faster by moving towards a composable strategy? And believe me, it's not for everybody. That's the other thing, is not everybody is going to want to even have this conversation. Don't have that pressure. But certainly an organisation that's digitally mature or facing disruption absolutely should be looking at how can we improve. And it's absolutely not a lift and shift model to the cloud. It can't be. No. And there's been, I was at ServiceNow out in Asia. And the biggest disruption we had, an opportunity we had, was the fact that the space we were going into was dominated by an on-premise perpetual player, and we had an answer to that. Workday for their space, disrupting the legacy players. We're going to disrupt ourselves, and we're going to disrupt others. And we also will find ourselves in the composable story going into situations where we are sitting alongside our competition, and we have to be comfortable with that. Because actually, from a customer's perspective, that's all good. I go back to to a thing that I learned a long time ago when I was in sales, and it was a very senior executive in a large oil company who said to me, I will never ever put all my cards with one vendor, because that means I can only innovate at the speed of that vendor. And I think that's one of the things that we can take into our future for Sitecore, which is, the customer benefits, right? In Composable, you have to work hard to make sure that SaaS product is renewed.
Agreed.
And you have to make sure that you protect your footprint against your competition. So if you're coexisting with other vendors in our space, you are doing the best thing for the customer. And they're also working hard to protect their space. So the customer wins.
I do love that message. And the equivalent that I compare to sometimes is, the upgrade path. I think about moving from monolith to composable. Everyone in their life has moved from a flip phone to an iPhone or some sort of intelligent phone, and that's that journey. We have to upgrade. We have to keep moving forward. And I know that can be painful sometimes, but those steps lead to further success.
I love that. You might be on the right track, but if you just sit there, you've got to run over. And that applies to us. It applies to our customers.
It does.
It's you have to be looking for change. One of the things that you asked me before this interview was my value that I sort of hinge my role here at Sitecore to. And there's a few. There's customer first. Obviously, that's important. Take ownership. Cultivating community, foster collaboration. But the one I really like that I think sums up Composable is pushing boundaries, because it really does capture that notion of innovation. Yeah. You can't innovate unless you get uncomfortable, and you can't innovate unless you're being creative, and that's a wonderful message to take out.
Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that we are accepting to transform completely our organization and going towards what customers really need, I think it's a very strong message.
Right.
And it's great to do.
I have another one if you want me to go.
Please,
okay. I just want to take and apply a lens of global business. I feel like every day, the change of the size of the world is shrinking from a business standpoint, let alone a societal landscape. But the global economy is shrinking, and I feel like the composable space has something to offer to that, and there might be some considerations around that. And that's where I'm going with this. But in sort of that global space, are there even accelerated by COVID, are there some considerations that people should be looking at to set themselves up for success going forward?
Oh, that's a massive question.
It is a massive question.
I've spent the last 11 years living out in Asia Pacific, and I've lived all over the place. I've lived in Australia, and I've lived in Singapore, and I've done business in China and Japan and all over Southeast Asia, and I speak a few languages as well, so it does help me sort of balance out very much an international view of this. And I think I would sum it up to there's two things. One is first of all, the Asia Pacific region is growing, way outpacing the rest of the world, and obviously that ability to capture economic flows globally is going to be, I think by 2050 they're going to have over 50% of the world's economic power base. And when it comes to personalisation and our story, it's an interesting one, because the Eastern Hemisphere, don't want to use old language, but that part of the world have a very different view when it comes to data privacy. And they can do things that are incredible. Like, I'll give you a great example I always point to when you're trying to articulate what does customer experience need, customer experience translate to when you have a no-holds-barred view of data privacy. And the best example I can give you is China. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was a very, very large Chinese insurance company that has something like, forgive me, probably higher now, but about 200 million customers, all right, in China. And they hit what I would describe possibly the most incredible customer experience scenario that I've ever heard, because they don't have to worry about data privacy. And one of the things that they do is they promise their customers that within 5 minutes of a car accident, an agent will be on scene, doing all the paperwork, calling the emergency services, processing the entire thing so that you can continue with whatever it is you need to be doing, or whatever the scenario is. And they achieve that through a combination of massive computing power, obviously, facial recognition, geolocation, traffic hotspots, the lot. They throw the works at it because they can. You could never possibly even try to do that with any Western insurance company.
Let alone traffic.
Because there would be all sorts of outcry on data privacy and what are you doing with my data. But you can do that in China. And I think, so if you sum up that, the answer to that question is, I think it's going to go in two very different directions. I think the Asia-Pac region, with a few exceptions obviously that have more legal Western frameworks, but I think there will be a huge push towards data privacy being used for good, with the right intent, and customers being aware of what's happening and all the rest of it. So you've got that consideration with the balance of opportunity and what market capture that represents. So it's going to be fascinating because that globalization question will push that question, I think, to the front. So in 20 years' time, we'll be scratching our heads going, what happened?
Yeah.
Because we are, when you see a scenario like that, it blows your mind.
Yeah.
And that's their value prop.
Nice. Massive question, well answered, and I knew I had the right person for that one. Well, and I'll just...
my favorite example.
And I'll extend down to that and say that our team did just put out a white paper, so Sitecore has a white paper out on the customer privacy paradox.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of that ironic tension between, I want to be personalized to, I want to feel like you know me, but I have to provide this data in order to do that. How much are you willing to give to get back? Yeah. And that's going to be an interesting state going forward. And
absolutely.
That's an amazing experience if you have somebody at your car in 5 minutes, let alone through all the traffic, as I was saying.
Yeah.
So.
Right, but that's the thing. If you look at the way that the world is moving and just generationally how much dominance that will feature. It has to, because it fundamentally challenges our beliefs on privacy and what we hold near and dear. Whereas in China, it's not a thing.
Yeah.
And how do you see that evolving for global brands? Probably working with some global brands that then might want to do the China thing in China.
Yeah.
And not being able to do it here. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, how many people do you know use TikTok? Where do you think all that's going?
Yeah.
So there is it's very interesting because global brands who are needing to obey the letter of the law will need to have a global and a local strategy. They will have to, just through sheer governance, have a correct understanding of what law can be applied. So I think technology risk and GRC will be very, very important. And obviously things like cybersecurity will always. So you always wherever there is opportunity. As I say, I'm old enough now to have been in this industry to see it's still a young industry, but you do notice a pattern of opportunity grows with revenue and technologies like ours that drive opportunity, and closely followed by anything related to fraud or malpractice, because typically criminals follow the money.
Yeah.
So you'll see, cyber will always be strong. You'll see governance will always be strong. The regulation will be strong. It has to be, but it's typically catching up.
Yeah.
So we will be pushing that overall IT tech landscape, and we'll all be moving to address that opportunity.
So marketers and management, be ready. It's not just you need your global, you need your local, typically global businesses have multiple teams and a global team, but it's going to just be amplified as we go forward.
Yeah. So it's getting more and more complex.
Yay.
Yay! You won't get bored. Do you have any great questions?
No, I think I have got everything I needed here. So, I appreciate
Good stuff.
It was very interesting to meet you today, Jo.
Thanks.
I think we started in the UK. We went a little bit to the US and we spent a lot of time in China. So we had a great global perspective.
Took a tour.
Yeah. We did a world tour in 20 minutes.
There we go.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.